Brenda Whitmore's white Escalade rolled over my front lawn at 6:14 a.m. and crushed the new sprinkler heads I had installed myself. The left tire sank into my fresh sod, right beside the small brass tag that read Private Irrigation Zone. Her bumper clipped my curb marker, bent it flat, and sent a wet slap of mud across the sidewalk where two school kids had to step around it. Then my control box on the garage wall blinked red. Zone 3 had lost pressure. That was the first serious mistake she made. She wasn't just parking on grass. She was stepping into a water system I designed, wired, mapped, and controlled down to the inch. The morning air smelled like cut roots and gasoline. Her engine ticked in the cold. I stood in my driveway with a coffee mug in my hand and watched her adjust her sunglasses like this was normal. She had done it before. Not once. Not twice. Enough times that the tire tracks had become dark trenches across the lawn I'd spent 3 weekends rebuilding. This time, though, she didn't stop at the edge. She pulled farther in. The Escalade rocked over the buried valve cover with a dull plastic crack. My coffee went still halfway to my mouth. Across the street, Mrs. Keller froze with her newspaper tucked under one arm. A jogger slowed down. Brenda smiled at both of them like she was arriving at a charity brunch instead of grinding 6,000 pounds of SUV into my property. She opened her door and stepped out in white tennis shoes, careful not to touch the mud. "Ethan," she said, bright and sharp, "you really need to keep this corner clear. It's becoming a neighborhood access issue. My name is Ethan Walker. I install irrigation and drainage systems for a living. I know how water moves. I know where pressure builds. I know what happens when people ignore boundaries marked plainly in metal, paint, and common sense." I looked past her at the lawn. The grass blades were folded under the tread. One sprinkler head leaned sideways, still trembling from the impact. A thin hiss came from beneath the soil. That little sound told me more than her whole speech ever could. She had broken a pressurized line. Brenda followed my eyes and gave a small shrug. "Maybe if your yard wasn't so close to the street," she said. That was when the garage light clicked on behind me. The irrigation controller rebooted itself. One blue indicator flashed, then another. I had built the system to protect the lawn from drought, runoff, and careless drivers. I had never expected the HOA's favorite rule enforcer to park directly on top of the sensor grid. But Brenda did not see wires under the grass. She saw a divorced guy with a modest house and a quiet voice. She saw someone she could lecture before breakfast. She stepped closer and lowered her voice. "I'm documenting this for the board." Her phone came up. Mine was already recording from the porch camera, the driveway camera, and the small lens mounted under the mailbox. 3 angles. Clear audio. Fresh damage. The hiss under the lawn grew louder. Water started pooling around her front tire. Brenda finally looked down. For the first time that morning, her smile slipped. Then the controller clicked again. Zone 4 armed itself. This was no longer about a parking spot. The controller stayed silent for 3 seconds. Then a soft mechanical click moved under the ground from left to right, like something waking up. Brenda heard it too. Her eyes narrowed behind her sunglasses. Water did not spray. Not yet. She looked at me and forced a laugh. "Is this some kind of intimidation thing?" I set my coffee on the porch rail. "No, that was all I said." She shifted her weight and pulled up her HOA app. I knew the motion. I had seen it before. Phone up. Photo. Citation. She walked 2 careful steps across the lawn and crouched near the broken sprinkler head. Her shoe pressed deeper into the wet soil. Another mistake. The little brass cap disappeared under her heel. A second later, the controller chirped once. "Short. Clean. Pressure change confirmed." Brenda looked up. "Your equipment is creating standing water. That is a maintenance issue." She said it louder this time. Loud enough for the neighbors. Mrs. Keller folded her paper. 2 teenagers stopped their bikes. Across the street, a garage door opened halfway and stayed there. Brenda loved an audience. That was when I realized she was not here because of convenience. She wanted visibility. She stood up and pointed at the lawn with one polished finger. "This corner creates obstruction. I have had multiple complaints." I looked at the street. Empty. Wide. 30 feet curb to curb. No parked cars. No blocked access. Just my yard and her SUV sitting where grass should be. I asked one question. "Who complained?" Her smile returned instantly. Too fast. Community concern is private. There it was. Not parking. Not grass. Authority. The smell of wet dirt got stronger. Water was moving underground now. I could hear the low rush inside the line. Brenda could not. She stepped back toward her vehicle and took another photo. Then another. She framed the puddle, cropped out the tire tracks, cropped out the curb marker she bent, cropped out the sprinkler head under her shoe. I had seen that move too. I walked to the mailbox and opened the small panel underneath. 3 green lights stared back at me. Cameras rolling. Motion tags active. Timestamps synced. I closed it again. Brenda caught the motion. Her expression changed for half a second. Tiny pause. Tiny calculation. "You recording me?" she asked. I shrugged. "I record my property." She looked around. More windows were opening now. More people watching. She lowered her phone. Then she said something that landed harder than the SUV. "The board is discussing this lot anyway. Not the lawn. Not the irrigation. The lot." I stayed quiet. She took that as surrender. People always do. She turned and walked toward her Escalade. The front tire spun once trying to climb out of the soft ground. Mud sprayed across her own passenger door. She stopped moving. Her jaw tightened. The controller inside my garage gave one long tone. Brenda looked toward the house. Then she looked back at the lawn. She finally understood something under her feet was still running. Brenda did not move for a few seconds. She stood beside the SUV with one hand still on the door and watched the wet soil darken around the front tire. Then she smiled again. Smaller this time. Controlled. "You really built all this for grass?" she asked. I looked at the controller through the garage window. Blue lights. Stable signal. The system was doing exactly what it was designed to do. Measure pressure. Adjust flow. Protect the yard. I answered without raising my voice. "Not for grass." Her eyes narrowed. She glanced toward the houses across the street. People were watching now, but pretending not to. Coffee mugs. Half-open garages. Phones held low. Brenda straightened her shoulders. Public mode. She tapped her screen and started recording. "For documentation purposes," she announced, "this property appears to be creating runoff conditions affecting neighboring lots." She turned slowly so her phone could catch the puddle and the curb. Not the tire. Never the tire. Then she pointed at the water spreading under her own front wheel. "See that?" she said. "That could become liability." I almost laughed. Instead, I walked to the edge of the driveway and crouched beside the curb marker she bent earlier. The metal post was folded over and pressed into the mud. Fresh scrape marks. White paint transfer. Escalade height. I lifted it and set it upright. Brenda watched but said nothing. She knew. I knew she knew. Across the street, Mrs. Keller finally spoke. "Brenda, your wheel is in his yard." Brenda did not even turn. Temporary access. That phrase landed harder than I expected. Not parking. Access. I looked at the tire tracks crossing the lawn. Not random. Same path. Same angle. Deep enough in places that old tread marks still showed under the new grass. She had been using this route for a while. That explained something that had been bothering me for weeks. The dead strips. The pressure alerts. The uneven watering reports. The controller had not been failing. Someone had been compressing the zones. Brenda stepped back into the SUV and turned the wheel. The engine growled. Tire spun. Wet dirt sprayed. The vehicle moved 6 inches and stopped. She pressed harder. The front end dipped slightly. Another chirp came from the garage. Pressure spike. Flow compensation active. Brenda took her foot off immediately. She looked toward the house again. Not at me. At the garage. At the box she had ignored all morning. Then she opened her window. "How much of this thing is automated?" she asked. That question told me more than she realized. Not anger. Not embarrassment. Calculation. I walked over and picked something out of the mud. A small black plastic cap. Sensor housing. Cracked clean across. I held it up. Brenda stared at it for 1 second too long. Then she said quietly, "That should not have been there." I looked at her. It was. Her face changed. Fast. She put the SUV in park and reached for her phone again. This time she was not calling the board. Brenda held the phone to her ear but did not speak right away. She stared at the cracked sensor cap in my hand like she was trying to decide whether she had broken something expensive or something inconvenient. The morning had gone quieter. Even the birds seemed to back off. Then she turned away from me and lowered her voice. Too late. The porch camera picked up enough. "Can you get someone out here?" she said. Pause. "No, not emergency. Just board support." Board support. Not roadside assistance. Not maintenance. That told me this was already bigger in her head than a stuck SUV. She ended the call and slipped right back into her neighborhood president smile. No reason to escalate this, she said. I looked at the mud around her front wheel. You parked in my yard. She gave a quick laugh. That is not the issue anymore. Interesting answer. Not wrong. Not denial. Just redirect. She opened her notes app and started reading from her screen. Unapproved underground equipment. Potential drainage modification. Safety concern. She said each phrase slowly like she was laying bricks. I looked at the lawn again. None of those were new words. Too clean. Too prepared. She had come with language ready before she even arrived. A breeze moved across the yard and carried the smell of wet dirt and hot engine metal. The water under the soil kept moving. Slow. Controlled. The controller adjusted pressure every few seconds. Tiny clicks from inside the garage. Brenda heard them now. She pretended she did not. A white pickup turned into the street and stopped halfway down the block. Neighborhood maintenance. Not city. HOA logo on the door. Brenda saw it and relaxed immediately. There it was. Back up. The truck parked. A man in a reflective vest climbed out, holding a clipboard. Not tools. Clipboard. He walked over and nodded to Brenda first. Not me. Morning, he said. Board requested assessment. Assessment. On my lawn. Before talking to the owner. I folded my arms and stayed quiet. Brenda pointed at the puddle in the controller box visible through the garage window. Possible non-compliant irrigation setup, she said. The guy glanced at the SUV sitting halfway in my yard. He looked at the tire. Looked at me. Then back at Brenda. Vehicle involved? Brenda answered instantly. Temporary access due to visibility limitations. Same phrase again. Rehearsed. The guy scribbled something. I noticed the form. Header already printed. Property review notice. Date field blank. They did not come to investigate. They came expecting paperwork. The maintenance guy finally asked me, mind if I take a look? I shook my head once. Stay on the sidewalk. Brenda's smile disappeared. The guy stopped. He looked confused. I pointed toward the curb. Private irrigation infrastructure starts 3 feet in. He looked down. Painted markers. Brass tags. Small warning plates. All visible. Brenda followed his eyes and realized something she should have noticed earlier. Every line had been marked the entire time. She looked at the garage, then at the controller, then at the camera under the mailbox. Her face changed again. She finally asked the question she should have started with. How long have those cameras been recording? Brenda did not answer her own question. She just stared at the mailbox camera and waited. I looked at the maintenance guy instead. 6 months, I said. His eyebrows moved before he could stop them. Brenda turned slowly. 6 months. I nodded once. Continuous event recording. Motion tags. Timestamps. Pressure logs. The air changed. You could feel it. Not dramatic. Just quieter. Like everyone on the street suddenly remembered they had places to be, but stayed anyway. Brenda crossed her arms. Recording neighbors raises privacy concerns. I looked at the camera mounted directly at my own driveway. It records my property. She opened her mouth. Closed it. Then she pointed at the garage. You monitor water usage too? I could hear where she was going now. She wanted the conversation away from her vehicle and toward my system. The maintenance guy finally stepped closer to the curb. He stayed outside the markers. Smart. He crouched and read one of the brass plates. Irrigation sensor field. Do not drive over. He looked up at Brenda. She did not look back. He stood and cleared his throat. Ma'am, these are marked. She smiled without moving her eyes. I never saw them. Nobody said anything for a second. Then Mrs. Keller folded her newspaper and said from across the street, they have been there since spring. Brenda ignored her. The maintenance guy checked his clipboard. His whole posture changed. Less official. More careful. He looked at me. You mentioned logs? I walked into the garage and opened the controller cabinet. Cool air. Soft electrical hum. Rows of blue indicators. The display showed timestamps, pressure changes, and zone history. I did not touch anything. I just stepped aside. He leaned in. Brenda followed, but stopped at the threshold. The screen showed repeated pressure events. Same location. Same angle. Same weight profile estimate. Dates stacked down the display. Tuesday. Thursday. Saturday. Again. 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 Tiny dips. Tiny recoveries. One pattern. The maintenance guy read the screen twice. That cannot be right. I looked at him. It tracks compaction. He stared another second. You mean vehicle load? I nodded. He slowly turned toward the driveway. Then toward Brenda's SUV. Then back to the dates. Brenda stepped forward fast. Too fast. That does not prove anything. Her voice was sharper now. Anybody could have driven there. I stayed quiet. Silence works better than arguments. The maintenance guy touched the screen and opened the event gallery. Photos appeared. Not license plates. Just snapshots tied to pressure alerts. Tire. Wheel. White paint. Same angle. Different mornings. Brenda saw the first image and stepped back immediately. Then she saw the second. Her face lost color. Then the third. She looked at me. Not angry. Not embarrassed. Calculating again. She asked quietly, "You kept all of this?" I closed the cabinet. "I keep records." She stared at the garage for another second. Then she reached for her phone and walked away from everyone before making the call. Brenda walked halfway down the sidewalk before she started talking. Not loudly anymore. Her shoulders were tight. One hand covered the phone. The maintenance guy stayed near the garage and kept looking at the closed controller cabinet like it had personally offended him. I stayed where I was. The lawn made quiet sucking sounds under the SUV tires. Water was still moving below the surface. Controlled. Measured. Brenda came back after about a minute. Different face. Less confidence. More structure. She stopped near the curb and put her phone away carefully. Board president wants a site review before any assumptions are made. I nodded once. Good. She looked surprised by that answer. She probably expected arguing. Most people do. Instead, I stepped aside and pointed at the sidewalk. Stay off the lawn. The maintenance guy almost smiled. Brenda ignored that and tried again. If there are concerns about infrastructure disclosure, we can address those. Infrastructure disclosure. New phrase. New direction. She was building distance from the original problem. I looked at her SUV still buried halfway into my yard. You mean parking? Her jaw tightened. No answer. The maintenance guy checked his watch. Then he looked at me. Can I ask something? I shrugged. He nodded toward the garage. Why install compaction monitoring in a residential yard? Fair question. I looked at the grass. Water beads reflected morning sun in small bright dots. Because people do exactly this. He stared at the tire tracks. Then nodded slowly. Brenda looked annoyed now. Not because she disagreed. Because she knew that answer sounded reasonable. A white crossover rolled into the street and stopped near the mailbox cluster. Another HOA vehicle. This one cleaner. Two people got out. Clipboards again. Tablets. Notepads. Nobody brought recovery equipment for the SUV. Interesting priority. They walked over fast, and Brenda met them halfway. She talked first. Fast. Pointing toward my garage. Toward the puddle. Toward the controller. One of them looked over and asked me from 20 feet away, "Did you alter drainage conditions?" I looked at the vehicle sitting in my lawn. No, he wrote something anyway. Then he asked, "Have you informed the board of underground systems?" I looked at the brass markers lining the edge of the grass. I informed the ground. The maintenance guy turned away to hide a laugh. That did not help Brenda. One board member finally walked over and stopped at the curb. He looked down, read the warning plates, saw the markers, then looked at the SUV. His expression changed. He pointed at the tire and asked Brenda quietly, "How did you get in there?" She answered too quickly. "Visibility issue." He looked at the road. Empty. He looked at me. Then at the tracks crossing older tracks beneath the fresh grass. He crouched lower. His fingers followed one compressed strip that disappeared under newer growth. He stood up slowly. "These are not from today." Nobody spoke. Brenda turned immediately. "That is not relevant." He looked at her for a second too long. Then he asked the question she clearly did not want. "How many times have you driven through here?" Brenda did not answer right away. She gave that little laugh people use when they think confidence can replace facts. "I do not keep track of routine neighborhood movement," she said. Nobody wrote that down. The board member stayed crouched for another second and pressed two fingers into one of the older tracks. Dry underneath. Compressed layers. Not fresh. He stood up and brushed dirt off his hand. "These have age." Brenda folded her arms. "That proves nothing." The maintenance guy finally spoke again. "Actually, repeated compaction does leave patterns." Brenda turned toward him so fast I thought she would cut him off. She stopped herself. "Audience again." She softened her voice. "We are not here to speculate." The board member looked at me. "You said there are records?" I nodded and walked back into the garage. Nobody followed this time. I opened the cabinet and connected the controller to the wall display I use for calibration. A larger screen lit up. Quiet fan noise. Blue interface. Date logs. Zone maps. I selected one panel and stepped aside. The screen showed pressure events over 6 months. Colored marks. Mostly green. One area burned orange over and over. Same corner. Same path. Same load estimate range. One of the board members leaned closer. That cannot be normal. I zoomed in. Event thumbnails appeared along the timeline. Tiny snapshots. Timestamp. Soil compression. Moisture displacement. Not surveillance. Just system events linked to pressure changes. White vehicle. Same entry angle. Different mornings. Brenda stared at the screen and did not blink. The maintenance guy quietly counted. 1, 2, 3. He stopped after 10. There were more. The board member looked over his shoulder. How many? I tapped the filter. 37 events. Nobody said anything. Even the street got quiet again. Brenda recovered first. This is selective. Her voice sounded thinner now. There could be context. I looked at her. There is. I opened another panel. Manual notes. Dates. Short entries. Repaired head. Replaced sensor. Resoldered strip. Reset pressure. Every repair had a photo. Every photo had tracks. The maintenance guy let out a breath through his nose. One of the neighbors actually stepped off her porch. Brenda looked around and realized people were no longer watching me. They were watching her. She took one step toward the display. You documented all this instead of saying something? I looked at the lawn. I said something 3 times. Her expression changed. Tiny pause. She remembered. First polite conversation. Then printed signs. Then the email. She remembered all of it. She just assumed nothing would happen. One board member asked quietly, "You received warnings?" Brenda looked at him and answered immediately. They were not formal. Wrong answer. His eyes moved. Small but noticeable. Not because of the lawn anymore. Process. Documentation. The maintenance guy looked at the SUV and then back at the logs. Wait. He pointed at one event. This one happened at 6:14 this morning. He looked at the controller. Then at the mud around the tire. Then at me. So this system is still tracking right now. The maintenance guy kept looking between the display and the SUV like he expected one of them to blink first. I nodded once. Live updates every 15 seconds. Nobody laughed. The board member stepped closer to the screen. The newest event sat at the top. Active. Pressure imbalance. Load detected. Zone 4 compensation running. Timestamp still moving. Brenda saw it too. She folded her arms tighter. This proves your system is over-engineered. Wrong move. The board member looked at her. Then back at the screen. That is your concern right now? She did not answer. The controller made a soft tone from inside the cabinet. New data point logged. The maintenance guy glanced outside. The front tire had sunk another inch. Not dramatic. Just enough to notice. Wet soil does that. Especially after repeated compaction. Brenda turned immediately and walked to the SUV. She got in and shut the door harder than necessary. Engine started. She pressed the accelerator lightly. Tire rotated. Mud shifted. The vehicle settled again. Another tone from the controller. Another update. She stopped and opened the door. Nobody said anything. She climbed back out and brushed invisible dirt off her sleeves. I am not causing damage by trying to leave. I stayed near the garage. Nobody said you were. One of the board members looked at the lawn and asked quietly, "How long has water been running?" I answered honestly, "Enough to protect the roots." He nodded slowly, then looked at the older tire paths crossing the yard. Something connected for him. He turned to Brenda. "You crossed this area before?" Brenda gave the same answer again. Visibility. Temporary access. Community concern. The words sounded thinner every time. The maintenance guy looked at the screen and then opened the event notes. Repair log. Dates. Costs. Sensor replacement. Soil restoration. Seed. Labor. He read silently for a few seconds, then looked up. "You repaired this 4 times?" I nodded. He looked at Brenda's SUV, then back at the list. Nobody needed to say the next part out loud. One of the neighbors finally did. "Mrs. Keller." Quiet voice. Clear enough. I thought he was watering too much. Brenda looked toward her, but Mrs. Keller kept going. Now I know why the ground stayed soft. That changed the room. Not legally. Socially. Heads moved. People looked at the lawn differently. Not as landscaping. As repeated damage. Brenda noticed it too. Her voice changed. Softer. More reasonable. This is becoming emotional. The board member looked at her and blinked once. 37 events is not emotional. Silence again. The controller clicked. Another live update. One of the board members looked at me. Can you export this? I nodded. Brenda turned immediately. Hold on. Too fast. Too sharp. Everyone looked at her. She smiled again, but it arrived late. Before records start moving around, maybe we should resolve this informally. Nobody answered. The maintenance guy looked at the active timestamp. Then at the SUV still sitting in the lawn. He asked the question nobody expected. Brenda, why were you cutting through this yard in the first place? Brenda opened her mouth and closed it again. For the first time all morning, she did not have a prepared phrase ready. She looked at the street, looked at the board members, looked at the SUV sitting nose down in the soft ground. Then she sighed through her nose and adjusted her sunglasses even though the sun had moved behind clouds. Because this corner slows traffic, she said. Nobody reacted. She kept going. People cut through here all the time. The maintenance guy looked around at the empty road and asked quietly, who? Brenda did not answer immediately. That silence lasted too long. One of the board members glanced at the street map on his tablet. He zoomed in, zoomed again, then looked up. This route saves maybe 8 seconds. Brenda folded her arms. Efficiency matters. Nobody wrote that down either. The board member lowered the tablet and looked at the tracks again. Then at me. Did you ever block access? I shook my head. Never. He looked at the road. Wide. Open. Clear. Then at the lawn. Marked. Tagged. Protected. He nodded once. The maintenance guy looked uncomfortable now. So people were using private property because it was easier? Brenda corrected him immediately. Community use. The board member finally looked directly at her. Community use is not self-declared. Quiet sentence. Heavy sentence. Brenda smiled again, but there was nothing behind it now. She turned to me. Look, maybe we all got carried away. I looked at the garage. The controller gave one soft confirmation tone. Zone stabilized. Pressure normal. She followed my eyes. Can we just move on? I looked at the lawn. 37 events. For repairs. Months of pressure alerts I thought were equipment failures. It was never the system. The board member closed his tablet and slipped it under his arm. No, nobody expected him to say it that fast. Brenda stared at him. He continued. Calm voice. Documented repeated entry. Recorded warnings. Recorded damage. Recorded activity today. He looked at the maintenance guy. Please photograph the markers and current condition. Brenda stepped forward. Hold on. Nobody moved. The maintenance guy started taking photos. Wide shot. Tire. Sensor marker. Controller timestamp. Brenda looked around for support and found none. Even Mrs. Keller had gone back inside. Brenda turned to me one last time. You built all of this because people would not stay off your lawn. I looked at the grass. Water drops catching morning light. Brass tags still visible. Controller humming softly behind me. I shook my head. I built it because they never believed the lawn counted. Nobody spoke after that. Brenda stood beside her SUV while photos were taken. The controller gave one final click and shut Zone 4 down. The lawn stayed wet. The records stayed saved. And for the first time in months, nobody drove across it.